following segment is brought to you in partnership with our friends over at Future 42. Turn your frustration into action. At future42.org, make sure to sign up for their newsletter. Future 42 just conducted a poll, and they are allowing us to give you an exclusive first peek at their poll results. And, you know, I get disappointed by polls a lot, I will say, where I'm like, wow, we look like the stage is set to bring balance back to Washington, etc. And then, you know, elections happen and I'm disappointed all over again. But there are some aspects to this poll that for me really show that Washington voters, you know, here we're in this blue state, right? But Washington voters, I think the common sense majority share the same opinion on issues around public safety, issues around taxation, and issues around effective government. And is the majority party utilizing its time, its energy, its priorities in the right way? So anyway, I want to go through just a few of the key results from this Future 42 poll. They're going to have the entire thing up at future42.org tomorrow for you to look at. But one of the things, you know, the overall question, would you say things in Washington state are headed in the right direction, or is the state on the wrong track? That is one of the questions that was asked in this polling. Only 35% said they believe that the state of Washington is headed in the right direction. 53% said the wrong track. 53% wrong track, 12% unsure. When I see 53% wrong track, I'm thinking, okay, we have Democratic rule across the board. Who do you blame for the state being on the wrong track? Because I just don't know how you could say the state's on the wrong track, but then still vote for the party that has been in power, I mean, for much of the last few decades, but total power the last 7 years. All right, Jay Inslee, I just figured that since he's on his way out the door, I would share with you the results of the question. Overall, do you approve or disapprove of the way Jay Inslee is handling his job as governor? 42% said they either strongly or somewhat approve. 53% said they strongly or somewhat disapprove. And again, that man, by the time he leaves, will have been the governor for 12 years. Bob Ferguson is just going to be an extension of the Inslee administration. There is no difference. Like, I hope people realize that. There is no difference. So for 53% of people who responded to this poll saying they strongly or somewhat disapprove of the job Jay Inslee is doing, you want to put somebody in the governor's office who's going to do the exact same thing? I mentioned, well, so first let me, this one was maybe the most interesting to me. And then I want to dive into some of the issue-based results in this polling. The respondents were asked, if the election for the Washington state legislature in your district were held today, would you vote for the Republican candidate or the Democratic candidate? And keep in mind that Democrats have a trifecta. So they have the House, the Senate, and the governor's office. But what's interesting about these results is, and of course there's a margin of error, but it's almost neck and neck to say 44% said if the election today were held today, they'd vote for the Republican candidate. 45% said they vote for the Democrat, and 11% said they were unsure. But to me, you know, if you're gauging the pulse of the populace, then yeah, that's pretty neck and neck. And I have to imagine that Republicans like those numbers. Now, the question is, can they? Of course, there's a lot left to the imagination there. Who is the Republican candidate? Does that matter? You know, what if it's a really bad candidate? Or what if the Democratic candidate is really bad? And so I know there's a lot left to the imagination, but the fact that they're neck and neck, I think is really good. And I've said, I think there ought to be a really concerted effort, maybe even more so than the governor's race or some of the big statewide races in 2024, to get back one of the chambers. All you need is a few seats up in one of them, and you stop the worst bills from moving forward. The impact would be so significant. So a couple results on the issues, which again showed me, like, when I talk about my positions on these issues, and I'm called, like Seattleites call me right wing, well, my opinion on the issues I'm about to share are the same as the majority of respondents. So is everyone right wing? No, everyone's common sense, and they want a common sense approach to public safety. They don't want to pay too much in taxes. So one of the vehicular pursuit law, we talked about that, right? So lawmakers in 2021 overhauled it. You know, this was the first legislative session after the George Floyd death. And so they made it nearly impossible for police to pursue any suspects. And so we lived with that for 2 years. The results were disastrous. And then they passed in this legislative session kind of a little bit of a fix, but it really didn't do much of anything. But look at these results. So they were asked which vehicular pursuit law they prefer. The law that we had in place for years and years and years before 2021 and police defunding, or the 2021 law, the weak law that dramatically limited the ability of police to pursue suspects, or the new law, which is sort of a watered down, tepid version of the old law. 60% said, hey, take us back to before 2021, to before this disaster that we embarked upon. 9%, just 9%, said they liked that 2021 law that thrust us into a public safety emergency. And then 22% said, yeah, the new law is okay. But 60%, that is very significant. I happen to agree with those 60% of respondents. They're like, we need to go back to sanity when it comes to public safety. Another issue that I thought was interesting, because again, when we talk about taxation, I would say Democratic voters are much more likely to vote to tax themselves, much more likely to support taxes on the rich as they're sold to people. But this was the question asked in this Future 42 poll. Was the Supreme Court right or wrong to revise the definition of income to allow for the capital gains tax? And again, Democrats passed a tax on capital gains, and we knew it was unconstitutional. But somehow they got the Washington State Supreme Court to uphold it, and now we have a capital gains tax, and they billed it as a tax on the rich, although they're not doing anything to relieve taxes on the poor. I digress. But 62% said that the high court in the state was wrong to redefine the definition of income. 62%. 24% said they agreed with the decision. 14% said, I'm unsure. I think that's significant. And then I'll just do this last one because we've been talking so much about the tax issue. Again, I want you to keep in mind, Democrats are much more likely, and we're in a blue state, right, to vote to increase taxes on themselves, to be okay with a higher tax rate, to fund various government programs. The question, should the state gas tax be higher or lower? Only 16% said higher, which I'd like to meet you. Something tells me you don't own a car and you don't commute anywhere. And that's okay, you're entitled to your opinion, but something tells me the 16% who said higher aren't actually paying any money for gasoline. 71% said lower. Yeah, we have one of the highest gas tax rates in the country, and now we're seeing gases go up because of the carbon cap and trade program. 71% said, yeah, lower gas tax, please. I would ask that 71%, well, who are you voting for? Are you voting for the people who are making our gas taxes so high? Something tells me that at least some of you are. And then 13% said, I can't decide or not whether taxes at the pump should be higher or lower. So just to give you an idea of who was surveyed in this, it was 600 registered voters who are likely voters in the state of Washington. 70% were done text to web, 30% were done live over the phone. This was done June 5th to June 7th, with the margin of error being 5 percentage points. But again, when I go back and I look at some of the results for that, like people want lower taxes at the pump. They don't believe that the capital gains tax is constitutional. They want to go back to the pre-2021 police pursuit law to restore public safety on our streets. So you want all of these things that are the exact opposite of what the party in power is doing. Really interesting poll results from our friends over at Future 42. And as I mentioned, they will have those up at future42.org tomorrow, so make sure to check that out.